Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Axelrod, Editor-in-Chief of Culture, and I'm here in the wine room at Cheval Restaurant in Portland, Maine for Uncork Your Potential. Presenting today will be Maya Goslin of Sip Wine Education. She's terrific, and if you were in the first seminar, which most of you were, I'm sure you enjoyed it, and she's got a lot more information and deep knowledge to share with you today. We're presenting Uncork Your Potential, a three-part series of wine education events in partnership with King Estate Winery. A little bit about them. Since 1991, the King family has been making award-winning wines on their beautiful estate in Eugene, Oregon. And they just happen to be the largest certified biodynamic winery in North America. Few housekeeping details, including one new piece of information that's really important because it is about the wine that you're going to receive. So those of you who have a resale wine license, your wine will come to you via your distributor. And to arrange that, because of a legal technicality, we're going to ask you to reach out to Pat O'Connell at King Estate. Her email is pato@kingestate.com. And we'll follow up with an email that relays this information again. For those of you who don't have a resale license, you will receive a voucher to purchase the wine. Questions today, you can ask them in the chat feature, and we will answer some of them perhaps during the presentation, but there will also be a dedicated time for questions at the end of the presentation, about 10 minutes. And any overarching general wine questions, you can email to me, editor@culturecheesemag.com, and Maya is going to choose a few of those to answer during the final seminar. First, we're going to watch a short video about King Estate Winery, and then Maya will get started with her presentation. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you are too. Thanks so much for being here.
People are looking for things that are better. They want better choices. They want to make better decisions about their food and the way they live. And I think biodynamics is going to deliver that to people. King Estate, as a winery, believes in doing the right thing and setting a good example, that it has impact on our boundaries, and it's a message that is important in the world today. Biodynamics takes things to a different level. It turns itself away from monoculture, looks holistically at the entire estate, and it judges the diversity and the integration of a lot of different components. As an example, what we're doing says that it's possible, it's feasible, and yes, everybody can do it. And that's the important piece of this, and giving people a different path away from chemical industrial farming. Sometimes great changes come from small examples.
All right. So hello again, everybody. As Susan said, my name is Maya Goslin from Sip Wine Education, and I'm so happy to be here again today to present the second part of this series to you all. We are in Cheval in Portland, and it's sponsored by, in partnership with King Estate Winery. So if you were on last week's class, then you have the first set of information that we did a lot of building block, a lot of Wine 101 content. I will probably weave in a little bit more today. If you're just joining us for the first time, as Susan said, please do be sure to try and watch that first video because this builds on the first class. So what I'm going to sort of address today is the art of the sale. And I'm not necessarily talking about you selling, I'm talking about the salespeople selling to you. So whether you are building a wine program for the first time or you are interested in expanding your existing program, the salespeople have, sorry, we have a little echo here. Okay. Am I still? Okay. Sorry, we have a background noise here. The salespeople will be looking for you, and if you aren't prepared, if you don't have a clear idea of what it is you want, you can easily sort of end up with a fair amount of wine that you don't necessarily need or want or isn't in the style of your store. So We're going to talk about that and some tips to sort of navigate this process. So there are three sort of styles of wine sales. There's sizes, I should say. There's the large guys. Those are the big distributors that have access to the most wine. They also have access to the best discounts, and they have an ability to get you things that maybe you wouldn't be able to otherwise get. So supply has certainly been an issue over the last year, and the large distributors, of course, are able to sort of navigate around some of those hiccups. Medium-sized distributors, of course, will sort of be, they sort of ride both sides of that fence. They're niched, but they also have access to some larger brands as well. And they tend to be competing with the big guys and the small guys, so they can get a little bit lost in the shuffle there. And then the small distributors are the ones that are going to have those unique, hard to find wines that no one else is probably going to have. That is really a nice selling point for them. However, what can often happen with that is that if you buy 2 cases and X number of other stores buy a couple of cases, the supply can easily diminish because they didn't purchase a lot of it in the first place. So those are things you have to keep in mind. However, when you're ready to start tasting, be very clear with whoever you want to work with about what you want. If you're a small store and you want 50 SKUs, then stick to 50 SKUs. If you're a large entity and you want 150 to 200 different wines in there, then that's what you need to be clear with as well. But you can easily get so overwhelmed with wine. So let's talk about tasting. As I mentioned last week, the best time of day when your palate is at its sharpest is 8 o'clock in the morning. Not really feasible for everybody, but if you are able to carve out some time to sit down with a distributor to actually taste wine in the earlier part of the day, you will get a lot more out of it. If you just can't do that, and the end of the day it is, then just be prepared to realize what I talked about last week. At the end of the day, you've had a lot of different things to eat, to drink. All of that affects your ability to taste and smell, as do aromas. So detergents and perfumes, all of that really plays into how you taste wine. So those are the 2 different, obviously, scenarios for how you're going to do this. But I usually I always try to err on the side of tasting earlier in the day if possible. However, let's talk about spitting. Nobody likes to do it, but it's necessary. You cannot taste any really serious amount of wine and not spit the wine out. Your reps will be doing it because they taste wine all day. If there are wines that you really like and you want to taste again, go ahead and give a swallow. But those sips and those swallows certainly add up, and the next thing you know, you've had a couple glasses of wine. If this is the beginning of your day, you're not going to get anything done. If it's at the end of your day, all right, that's fine. But what I usually recommend doing is circling back to something that you really liked and trying it again later. So to that end, something I always recommend, I cannot stress this enough, is do not judge a wine for better or for worse in finality on one taste. I have gone to tastings myself where I've tasted a variety of wines. Then the last wine I tasted, I thought was the best wine I ever had. And then I purchased 2 cases of it, only to get it home to find out that I didn't actually like that wine at all. So that wine becomes gift wine to people. Conversely, I've had a wine at a tasting where it kind of got lost in the shuffle and it didn't impress me very much. And I've tried it again at a later date, only to realize that it's my favorite wine, and I'll buy, and then it becomes my house wine and I missed out on that early on. So that's something to just always keep in mind, is your palate can fool you. It does a good job of doing that. The more wine you taste, the more sort of muddied your palate becomes. So those are just important factors to keep in mind. If you really liked something, don't be afraid to ask your sales rep to come back the next day with a fresh bottle, or to leave a bottle if they're able to do something like that. And that is really, especially if this is something that you're considering bringing in and featuring as wine in your program overall. So, and I want to talk about price as well. So on this side of the industry, you're going to be pricing the wines, but we are just as people and as consumers in general, we are very influenced by price. when we go somewhere, if we perceive that a product has a high value to it, our mind plays tricks on us. There's an endorphin reaction that happens, and your mind tells you that you like something when you taste it or drink it, even if you don't. The power of the mind is very, very strong. So if you are having something that you know is a $200 bottle of wine, your mind is going to say, this is good. It's worth $200. I have to like it. And when you taste it, your mind will tell you you like it. The same is the case for an inexpensive bottle of wine. If you're trying something that costs, $6, you're going to say, maybe it's okay, but it's only $6. So how can it actually be any good? And that is what will be the result of your mind makes up your mind for you. And then there you go. So when you're tasting, if you can do it, when you're tasting with your sales reps, really try to not know the price of something. It's hard because they're going to give you sales sheets, and they might even talk about it ahead of time. But I find that when I'm blind tasting on the price, I tend to have the best reaction to the wines. So that's just something to keep in mind there when you do that. So now in terms of what you want for wines for your store, you know your store's concept, you know your store's philosophy, and you're going to want to match that with the wines. But like I was talking about last week, there are some very expensive wines out there that go so beautifully with cheeses, Sancerre and Changeover being a classic pairing that I talked about last week. But there's also a pretty substantial list of other styles of wine that go really nicely in lieu of Sancerre. So I'm going to start off talking actually about sparkling wine, and then I'll go to the Sauvignon Blancs. So champagne taste, but not the budget. Don't we all have that? So champagne is, of course, in its own class. It is from that one part of northern France. All over the rest of France, though, they make sparkling wine. They make it in Alsace. They make it in the Loire. They make it in Limoux. And there are about 7 or 8 different regions that produce sparkling wines. They can't call it champagne either. Remember, only one tiny little administrative region can actually call it champagne. So the most popular style of sparkling wine from other regions is called Cremant. And then the region follows. So Cremant d'Alsace, Cremant de Bourgogne, which is Burgundy, Cremant de Loire. Those are sparkling wines that are made in those regions using grapes that are grown there and that are approved for use in sparkling wine. That meet the restrictions, that meet the classifications of those regions to be made into sparkling wine. They're all made in the champagne style, so second fermentation takes place in the bottle. What you have is the terroir of those particular areas. You have rich heritage, you often have pedigreed grapes, and you know you're going to be getting a very high quality product, but because it isn't champagne, it doesn't cost as much. Cremant is one of my favorite wines to see in stores. I feel like I don't see it enough, but let's say that champagnes at a retail price usually start off around, the lowest might be $25. They go all the way up to the thousands, of course. Whereas a Cremant, you can get in the store for about $10. And I would say the most expensive is probably $25 to $30 for a Cremant. So you're offering something that's, maybe your customers are interested in a champagne style. They don't have the budget for it. So this is a really nice alternative. And again, it tastes a lot like champagne. Blind tasted, it's pretty hard to tell. So I highly recommend Cremants. Then, of course, there are Spanish cavas, which are also made in the same style. Domestic sparkling wines from America. I love Roederer. I love Schramsberg. Again, those are champagne houses that came over here and bought vineyards and have brought their philosophies and their techniques with them. So you really do get sort of a champagne-esque kind of sparkling wine. And one of my all-time favorites is the Congruent sparkling wine, which is from New Mexico, which is the birthplace of viticulture in this country. But it's also a fantastic sparkling wine. So those are just some different styles of sparkling wine that you can bring into your store at an affordable price and not break the bank for that. And then, of course, so Sancerres instead of Sancerre, the Loire Valley is just so rich in Sauvignon Blanc, but coming from different areas. So it's the soil, it's the climate that's all conducive to growing grapes that are in the Sancerre-esque way, but they don't cost as much because they don't have the Sancerre name attached to them. So that's Touraine, Quincy, Couteau de Genois, and Val de Loire are all from the Loire, and those are really going to be at like 1 to 2 price points down from Sancerre, so you can really get some good stuff in there. Instead of white Burgundy, there's a Spanish grape called Gadeo, which white Burgundy is Chardonnay, and very expensive. Gadeo is from Spain, from Galicia. It's just beautiful. I love it as an alternative. Italian Soave and French Viognier as well. Red Burgundy, you can try a Beaujolais, really fantastic, fruity, fresh wine, and a fraction of the price. Or you could do a Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, similar climate, Burgundy and the Willamette Valley. And yet you have different price points as well for that. So those are all nice ways, I think, to incorporate some value into your store and offer a selection. So then let's talk about some inventory and shelving and arranging your store. So you're going to get the best pricing, as you know, when you purchase cheese. The same thing applies to wine. The more you buy, the better the pricing. So case discounts are going to give you substantial savings, but only invest in cases if you have the storage space, or you can put an entire case on your shelf. That's just going to depend on how much store space you have versus storage space. Also, don't invest too much in red wines that might be slower to move, because you're going to need to have proper climate control for those. You don't want a case of red wine sitting in your back room if it's going to be hot in there. So you have to keep those different factors in mind. But again, if you can do a case or even 2 cases, sometimes there'll be really fantastic discounts available the more you buy. That's really only do that, of course, if you can put that wine somewhere. If it's a fantastic discount, that's wine you're probably going to want to feature in the store anyways as some sort of great featured wine or sale wine or something like that. So it will probably move pretty quickly. And to that end, be on the lookout. Your salespeople should all be sending you notifications monthly on what's on special and what's being discontinued, or what is a vintage changeover. Those are all nice opportunities to grab some good wine at a good cost. But jump on those fast, because everybody is sent that same email. So if you see something and the price is like $6 less a bottle, and you like that wine and you do well with that wine, you're going to want to grab as much as you can, because you'll probably, if you know that you sell it, then you'll do well with it. But yeah, those are definite ways to save on some good wines. And a vintage changeover just means that the new vintage is coming in, so the distributor needs to get rid of the other vintage that they have, and if they have it left over, they're going to price it to move, price to sell. Shelving, how you want to organize your store. This is, I think a pretty substantial challenge for people when they're first setting up. You know how to organize your cheese, how you want to display it, but wine is a little bit different. Some stores arrange their wine by the variety, meaning over here are all the Chardonnays, French, Italian, Spanish, American. Over here are all the Pinot Noirs and from all the different countries, etc. So it makes it easy, right? Customers can come in, they look here, Chardonnay, I like Chardonnay. Here's a Sauvignon Blanc, I like Sauvignon Blanc. Other styles, other organizing techniques, and one that I think is probably the strongest is to do it by country and or region. So you have France here, and then within France, you might have Burgundy, Bordeaux, Champagne, Alsace, and the wines are in those particular areas. If you don't have the room to do that, you can just put all your French wines in France here, and then white and red, and then all your Spanish wines here, white and red. You can do it either way. Again, it just depends on how much room you have. And I think signage is just, and there's a third style actually, which I love this. Not a lot of people do it. There's a very well-known retail store in Boston called the Urban Grape, and they implemented, they're the first to ever do it. It's called progressive shelving. So their entire store is organized by weight. So it's lightest to heaviest, not organized by varietal and not organized by region. So there's plenty of information in their store to sort of direct you to what you're looking for, but it's organized by weight instead of anything else. And I think that that's really fun if you have the space to do that. So that's a good one that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned. But also in terms of overall signage, I'm a big fan of maps. I'm a big fan of, hanging wooden signs that say, France this way or Italy that way. The more information that's at people's fingertips, the fewer questions they have to ask until they want to ask them. Tasting notes. I like to see nice handwritten notes under wines. Don't do it for all the wines, but I definitely, because then you'll just be really crowded with it. But I do like, especially under a more unique wine, a more esoteric wine that maybe I haven't heard of before. So let's talk about Furpado. That's one of my favorite red wines right now. It's from Sicily. It's a summertime red. Hardly anybody knows about Furpado, and everybody should know about Furpado, in my opinion. But if I'm in a store in the Italian wine section and I see a Furpado, I've never heard of it, so I'm probably not going to buy it. But if there's a nice little note written there about, with some tasting notes and maybe the cheeses that it pairs nicely with, then I'm going to be intrigued. Also, the price points on Furpados range from $12 to $20 shelf price, so it's really good for sales. It's an easy buy, so I like that. Ratings. Do you use them or not? So we've all been in stores where you see there's a little tag underneath this wine, and it says WA 94. That means Wine Advocate rated this wine a 94. Wine Advocate, Wine Spectator, Wine Enthusiast, James Suckling, Robert Parker before he retired, influential wine critics. If we are a ratings influenced people, we tend to buy things based on someone else's opinion. Personally, I see the use for them. I don't necessarily always follow that. I find that maybe Wine Advocate tends to like a certain style of wine that isn't necessarily all the wine that I always love. So I don't know that they're always the right match for me, but like I said, customers do like, and really, if it's rated under a 92, I wouldn't put that out there. Because now we've become very snobby about the point system. So 92 or higher is what tends to impress us as consumers.
I do have a question.
Okay.
From Carrie. He's asking, he or she, I'm sorry, Carrie, asking if you can spell the name of that Italian varietal you just spoke of.
Yes, I can. But let me double check. Okay. Frappato, Furpado, and it is Sicilian. And Sicily is one of my favorite countries right now. I'm sorry, not country, Italian regions, producing some fantastic wines. And I can talk a little bit more about Sicily and Sicilian wines at the end. So Furpado, and this last week I did talk about countries identifying wines by the region or by the grape. Italy primarily identifies its wines by region. However, Furpado is the name of the grape. It's often blended with another Sicilian grape called Nero d'Avola, Nerod'Avola. And when those are blended together, it's a style of wine called Chiarisuolo, which is beautiful. All three styles are fantastic. I just happen to love Furpado in the summer. And it's also a wine that needs to be chilled. I put a light chill on it. It really has a high acidity, so it does nicely with that. So back to ratings. That's basically that's my spiel on the posting the ratings or not. Good sales tool, but I don't always personally go for them. What I do like to see though are staff picks, staff recommendations. So I think I tend to, as a consumer, when I'm in a store and I see that this wine is highly recommended by X staffer and that they recommended it with this cheese, just it's a tiny little piece of paper. It doesn't take a long time. You can put it out there pretty quickly. That's going to be more convincing to me, more interest to me. So, and then just quickly on staff notes there. So it is challenging. Not all of your staff are going to necessarily be 21. Not all of them want to taste wine, but if they can taste the wines with you, once you've brought an inventory in, by all means, have them taste. The more they taste, the more confident they are to talk about the wines that you have in the store, especially if they've had them with particular cheeses. But this is just such a tried and true method of selling, is pick 3 favorite wines, 3 favorite cheeses, and everyone has their own little set that they like to talk about. And if you have a little story about the wine, if you have a little story about the cheese, or maybe you just tried this cheese, it's what servers do in restaurants all the time. That's how they sell their specials. It's just such a fantastic way to engage with your customers, because people, like I always say, people will buy what you tell them to buy. They just need a reason. They need to be convinced that this is something that this staffer really likes and why. And it can just be the most simplest of reasons. But I did it all the time when I was a bartender, in every aspect of working in hospitality. It's been very effective, I find. And true, you really do have to like what you sell. So pricing, of course, is very important too. If the standard price markup on wine, let's say a wine costs you $10 a bottle. Usually you market, it's called a 1.3 or a 30% markup. So you're going to put that in the $13 category. The more expensive the wholesale cost of the wine, the sort of less the markup. And that's just because it becomes unfeasible, impractical to be able to sell it at such a high price. So if you have brought in a $200 Brunello, you're probably not going to want to market 30% up, but you might do 20%. On the opposite end, if you have a case discount, so $10 wines, $10 wholesale bottle cost, usually the case discount comes out to being around $7.69. I know this from experience. So when you get a nice little discount handed to you, that's for you. You don't need to mark up your wine based on the discounted price. You have an opportunity now, because you got a good sale price on something. You now have an opportunity to make a little more, but still not gouge your customer. If you want to really promote this wine, if you want to feature it as a special, then by all means, go up on the price a little bit. But if you have something that's now $8, but it was 10, stick to the 13 and make a few extra dollars. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Like I said, it's all about, what you got as a discount and what you want to pass along versus not pass along, or keep for yourself, as it were. So something else that I really like for organizing it for presentations and displays, I like unique displays. Yes, right now, like I mentioned last week, displays are big on rosés, big on the bubbles, because we're in those seasons. Well, bubbles are year round, but rosé is now. So you're seeing that primarily taking up a lot of space. But I think you can get a little creative. You can do a staff favorites kind of display. But amazing wines you've never heard of is a niche that I love, and I think is just so alluring to people. So some of the grapes that I put in the handout, but that I think are worth mentioning are, for white wines, the Spanish Gadeo, which is a great Chardonnay alternative, Italian Roero Arnese, Soave, fun to say, delicious to drink, and the name, I think it has a stumbling block for a lot of people with the name Soave, but actually beautiful wine. Pico de Piñe, Gavi, Moscofilero from Greece, and for red wines, the Furpado that I mentioned, Greek St. George, Greek Sino Mavro, Spanish Monastrell, Portuguese Touriga Nacional, and then Italian Lagrange. And these are in the handout, and I'm happy to spell anything again for people, but that's just a handful of wines you've never heard of. And maybe you have heard of some of these, but they're all fantastic wines that will set you apart as a niche store if you're interested in that. Those are wines you're going to have to taste. You're going to hopefully try to get your staff to taste as well. But overall, I think that's a really fun one, because all those wines that I put in there, styles, those grapes, those are all very cheese-friendly wines. So you could easily do something really unique in your store. And everybody, I mean, it is what we all want as customers. We want something new. We want something great. We want something that we've never had before. And better yet, if you guys are the only ones that have it in your store and no one else does, then you can really become known for having sort of like some really fantastic dynamic wines that people have to come to you to get. So that's just my personal take on that. So there were a couple of questions last week that I wanted to quickly get back to, just in terms of some Wine 101. Climate. This is just important to keep in mind. It is getting hot. It's hot in this country. It's hot everywhere. But climate change has affected the wine industry, and this is something to keep in mind as you're tasting wines too. And some winemakers have abandoned regions altogether. So California has become very hot, and it's become difficult to grow certain grapes there, Pinot Noir being one of them. So the further north you go, the cooler the climate. This is why Oregon right now is such a fantastic producer of the Pinot Noir varietal. Also, I'm seeing really nice Pinot Gris and Chardonnay come out of Oregon also. And like I've said, that climate is sort of similar to Burgundy. So you're getting wines that are Burgundian in their sort of presentation. So you're seeing this in Europe too, where, you know, regions that used to produce a certain style, now they're dealing with intense heat. They're not just dealing with heat, they're dealing with volatile weather. So you might have a terrible hailstorm that could wipe out a portion of a harvest, and then a heat wave following it right after that. So those are factors that the wine industry is dealing with all the time. But add that in with the issues we've had with tariffs over the last year and availability on wine in general, and you know, you sort of have to position yourself when you're thinking about what you want to bring in. Am I going to have trouble getting it? How was this year for the vintage? What am I looking at for quantity? And what am I looking at for pricing? Have prices gone up on these certain areas for the wines? So that's all, you know, definitely something to keep in mind for that. England in particular has just become a really interesting area for wine production. So it's been probably 10 to 15 years, and maybe longer, that they've been planting grapes for use in sparkling wine. And they do still wine, but the sparkling wine industry in England is really poised to take off right now. French champagne makers are investing in vineyards there. They're planting their grapes, and they're producing some absolutely fantastic bubbly. The Queen of England apparently has her own vineyard and her own sparkling wine. We will never be able to get it or taste it. It is sold out always, well in advance of when it's actually put out. So, but I think it's interesting. I would say that the best opportunity you might have to taste sparkling wine from England is with a medium to small distributor. They're very niched wines. They tend to be, you know, like they're a little quirky, they're interesting, they are delicious, and they're expensive. They're going to be priced on a level with champagne, I want to say, with sort of like a $40 champagne. That's what I'm seeing for the most part with the pricing. So I just wanted to note that aspect as well on that. Did we have a question?
We don't have a question, but we have another comment about Furpado.
Oh, okay. What's the Furpado?
Anne says Furpado, cost for Furpado is fantastic. The bottle looks great on a retail shelf.
It does. There is Baglio del Fate, if you can find that one, wherever you are. Baglio del Fate, Fate, I believe. It's the most vibrant, beautiful label that you could possibly have on a bottle. Its sister wine, the Nero de Avila, is also a beautiful label too. I will make a point about labels. So this is an instance where a beautiful label that is super alluring actually is the wine is still fantastic. Sometimes labels can be used to draw you in because they're interesting, and they're oftentimes covering up for what may be inferior wine inside the bottle. I usually say wines, I call them critter wines. So wines that might have kangaroos or monkeys or a starfish or bicycles on the label tend to be more mass marketed, more mainstream, big brand. And, you know, they are what they are. People buy them because of the label. Oh my gosh, I love that wine with that label on it. I love it. It's so fun. But they're not really thinking about what's in the bottle itself. However, the Baglio del Fate, Furpado, and Nero are beautiful labels, and the wine is beautiful as well. So I did want to talk about so Sicily is like the Furpado I mentioned, the Nero I mentioned. Gavi is the white wine that it's very well known for. That's sort of sharp, tangy, acidic, nice beautiful wine that goes with cheeses and seafood also. Sicilian wines right now are sort of having this beautiful, it's a revival in a way because they've been making wine there for so long, but for a period of time, it fell out of favor because Sicily took some government subsidies to produce bulk wine. So for a long time, they'd been making quality wine, and then the government offered them this money in order to produce just bulk wine that they could sell. And they did it, and then the quality plummeted, as did the reputation. So for the last 15 plus years, some very invested winemakers have gone back to the basics and done away with all that bulk content, bulk style of wine, and they're doing, they're back to small vineyards, small releases, and I think it's really well worth it. Just shifting over to Greece, we're seeing some fantastic wine coming out of Greece right now as well. I mentioned those varietals you've probably never heard of: Assyrtiko, Moscofilero, Xino Mavro, and Aortica. I think I pronounced all those correctly. Really great wines, and they're very similar to a lot of the famous wines that we would deviate to for classics, to Cabernets, to Zinfandels, to Chardonnays and Sauvignon Blancs. So again, those are unique wines. They're a little bit harder to find, but they're not impossible to find at all. So I'm really interested in always tasting wines from Greece when a wine rep comes to me with those. And then the third region I would just really say is the Loire Valley. I know I talked about the Sancerre aspect, but you have one area, it's about 170 miles for wine production, have so many different styles within it, from Muscadet, which is a bone dry white wine, to the Sauvignon Blancs. You have Chignon, which is Cabernet Franc. You have Sancerre, but you also have red Sancerre, which is Pinot Noir. Vouvray, which is Chenin Blanc. So you have one small area that's capable of producing so many different styles of wine: bone dry, medium body, sweet, sparkling, and the pricing on this. So the Loire just doesn't have that sort of pedigree that Burgundy and Bordeaux have. So the wines tend to be just more value driven. Anything under $40 and such good wine. And as I said last week, what grows together goes together. You've got fantastic cheese that comes out of this area. So it's going to be a fantastic pairing opportunity for you to do. So actually, I think that speaking of pairing, if you are joining us for the wine tasting portion, or like maybe you've already started, the recommended wines today were a Brut style Prosecco and a Chianti Classico. I opened my Chianti earlier, but it's probably fine if you open it now and pour it in the glass. If you haven't opened it, open it now, pour it in your glass, and then we'll go ahead and open the Prosecco. So I want to make one quick note about glassware before we get to this. I'm using a Riedel glass, one of my favorite. I'm using this is, if you can see it without the glare, this is essentially a white wine glass. So the flute, although it's beautiful, it's elegant, we love the flute. I probably have 20 at least in my wine cabinet, is not the best vessel for sparkling wine. When you pour sparkling wine, Prosecco or Champagne in, it goes to the bottom, bubbles go right up. So, and it really does need to open up a little bit. So there's actually, Riedel makes a champagne specific style of glass. It's just a little more like a tulip shape with an opening at the top. So you can look at that, but usually I just drink it in a nice white wine tulipy type of glass. And then of course for my red, I have, my nice red Chianti glass. And then before we get to the Prosecco, another note about glassware in general. Yes, we are in a post-pandemic era. Even having store tastings, depending on where you are, they may or may not be happening yet. If you're going to be doing tastings at some point in the future, if you're a large store, you're going to have to use the plastic. I'm not a fan of the little plastic cups, but that's just sort of a product of necessity there. If you are a smaller store and you can do it, glassware every time. It's just going to enhance the experience. And especially when you are tasting with your distributors, you have the glasses on hand. You have to have a nice dump bucket with you. Make sure you have water crackers and crostinis or plain food carbs like that so that you can have your palate being cleansed as you go throughout. But I'm a big fan for in-store tastings of glassware if you are able to do it. If you can't, then you can't. But I thought I would put my advocate for that in there. So everyone grab their Prosecco, your sparkling wine. So I recommended a Brut, which is, as I talked about last week, is dry. So I'm going to open this here. I do have a notoriously dry cork on this particular Prosecco, so I'm hoping we don't have any sticky issues there. But fun fact, because I love fun facts, the cage on the top of this, which is what keeps this cork in, there are always 6 half turns on the cage of a bottle of sparkling wine. Any bottle of sparkling wine, there are 6 half turns on it. So now the cage is off. So now my wine's been in an ice bucket all this time. So it should be nice and cold. I'm going to open it down here though. Pop. I did a little more pop for effect, but realistically, there should be just a nice little hiss when you open that bottle of sparkling wine, but I had to make sure you all heard it. All right, so, and the cheese that we have today that we recommended was a Gorgon, where's my note? Gorgonzola Dolce, thank you, Susan. All right, so over here, so you've got your nice blue veining there. So go ahead, pour your bubbles. So Prosecco, also sparkling wine, acts as a natural palate cleanser. So there you go. Killing 2 birds with 1 stone here. All right, so what I usually say is have a sip of the wine first so you know what you're having. So this is dry, but Prosecco in general is a little bit fruitier, of course, than something like a champagne. The grape, the Glera grape, has that note to it. There's a little more peach and honey in this, but also it hasn't gone through 2 fermentations in the bottle. Proseccos are, for the most part, fermented. Their second fermentation takes place in a giant stainless steel tank. The Charmat method is what that's called. Excuse me. So my Prosecco has a little bit of peach, a little ginger, maybe a little honey, lemon. So now, go ahead and have a nice bite of cheese. Does one of my partners want to have a bite of cheese? I don't like to talk and eat at the same time. So we chose a soft, blue, buttery cheese here. And I talked last week about complementary and congruent pairings. So this is an example of a complementary pairing. You have contrasting compounds. You have the acidity from the sparkling wine. You have the ginger notes and the peach notes here. And these enhance this cheese. They bring out, do you want some Prosecco to try this? Okay. Why not? Prosecco, it's just such a delightful aperitif. Thank you. So the Prosecco works to bring out these notes in this particular cheese. Now, I also picked these 2 because they're from similar parts of Italy. So here's my map of Italy. If it isn't too much glare, I hope not. It's not. So here's the boot. Right up here is Veneto, and Gorgonzola is from up there as well. So what grows together goes together. This is terroir at its finest when that works. And we're going to see it especially with the Chianti as well, and the Pecorino Toscano. So usually you just, terroir, like I was talking about last week, is the influence of the soil, of the climate, of the altitude, of all these different components that come together to create a sense of place and a sense of taste so that you drink and eat a place. So Prosecco, of course, is a DOC. It's an administrative region in northern Italy where you can make these sparkling wines. And the cheeses are often protected as well, meaning you can't produce X cheese in Y location. There's a lot of protected food, of course, in the world, and you would all know that for the cheese as well. So I love this pairing. I'm a big fan of sparkling wine and this kind of cheese. I hope you are too. And
it also cuts the richness of the Gorgonzola, which is really nice. The sparkles with the fatty, bubbles with the fattiness.
Yes. So sparkling wine, keep this in mind. Prosecco, Cremant, Champagne, whatever it is. dry, nice acidity. The richer, fattier, saltier, gooier the food, the better it's going to pair. One of the best pairings in the world, it's not cheese, but one of the sort of classic champagne pairings is champagne and fried chicken. Trust me. Trust me.
I have a comment from Carrie.
Yes.
Been trying ours with Marcella and Sown from Shepherd's Way. Am I saying that right, Carrie? And Amagorge from Caves of Furpado. So I guess the Amagorge is with the Prosecco, and the Marcella or Marcella, I'm not sure, and Sown from Shepherd's Way. So
I hope it's a nice pairing for you. Does it work? We want to know if that's a good pairing.
Yeah.
All right, so you've cleansed your palate nicely with this Prosecco. So now we'll shift over to our red. So we're going from Veneto to Tuscany, which is down here, central west side, right there where the purple is. So Tuscany, of course, is home to Chianti. It's home to Brunello di Montalcino, both of which are made with the Sangiovese grape. So I chose Chianti Classico. There are several different Chianti zones within Chianti itself. I have the Tenuta di Archino right here. This is a DOCG. Your Chianti Classico should also be, and you should probably see, if you have a Classico, the Gallo Negro, the black rooster on the back of the bottle. That is one of the symbols of Chianti Classico. So Chianti's Sangiovese, of course, famous for that sort of red cherry, violet note, a little bit of earth, a little bit of spice, plum, blackberry. So go ahead, now that I've chalked it up, give it a swirl. So I did have mine, Erin, and right there on the nose. I just get beautiful cherry and plum. So now you have the Pecorino Toscano. So sheep's milk, this is going to be a little sturdier, a little nuttier. There's going to be herbal notes that this wine is going to bring out. So this is going to be a congruent pairing. So this is where you have like compounds that work together really nicely. So these two will enhance one another. So would you like to try this one as well?
Thank you very much. Yes. And the cheeses that Carrie mentioned, they're trying with this, are also sheep's milk cheeses from Minnesota.
Okay. Oh, lovely. Is that? So these again will work. So this is the cheese, of course, is not an overly pungent cheese. So the Chianti will enhance and work beautifully with it to bring out some of those savory notes in there. So that's a congruent pairing. So we had a complementary and then we had a congruent. And you just want to make sure that your wine should equal the flavor intensity of the food. You don't want one to overwhelm the other. That's why you don't want huge full-bodied wines with very delicate foods and vice versa, because they get lost in translation. They're just aspects of wine that don't work perfectly, in concert for that. So I'm going to do a couple of little notes here about wine. So I opened my red earlier, of course, like I said. If you can see this, I am a bit of a corkscrew snob, I should say. I don't do any kind of rabbits or anything like that, but I do like to have a nice serrated blade. I like a wooden corkscrew on the end with the metal stainless steel down here, and I always like to have a hinge on the end of it. I find that it really, especially if you have a difficult to handle cork, this will save the day every time. So it's worth investing in. Don't ever just get one, get 2 or 3 nice corkscrews to have on hand so that you can use those. And then if you are ever going to do tastings in your store, or you're just going to have some open bottles because you wanted to taste, you're going to want one of these. So this is a nice stopper. This is actually one of the best, most effective stoppers. This just goes right into the bottle here. Push it down, lock it like so. And now this should stay fresh. It won't last long in my house, but it will stay fresh for a day or two if it actually ever stayed around for any length of time. There is another technique that I think 50% of people say works and 50% say doesn't. If you drop a long stainless steel spoon or knife down into the bottle of sparkling wine once it's been opened, some people say it keeps it fresh for extra time, and some people say it doesn't. I tend to find that it does whenever I've done it. I also know people who are like, it doesn't work at all. But really, sparkling wine goes quickly, I think, in most instances, so it's not really that important to contend with. So do we have some questions? Okay.
Not so many questions.
Well, I'd like to know if this was a pairing that people liked. It's sort of a classic, I think. Again, a goes together pairing for that. And again, these are simple things that you can do to set up in your store. Staff picks and recommendations are always going to be the most compelling, I think, for customers in general.
I have some more information about these cheeses, which really do sound kind of fascinating. So, and Uncork, or hard G pronunciation. So is funky and salty, brings up fruit in the Prosecco, makes sense. Marcella has morels, really ramps up the musty, not balanced by the Prosecco. Then Uncork, overpowered, gonna try North Fork whiskey watch Munster for redhead. Okay, a lot of cheese going on there.
Whoops.
And someone is asking, for those that was late to the meeting, yes, this is to you, Richard. We are going to send via email how to get the bottles from the distributor. We are going to follow up with that information via email. So, absolutely.
Yes, because next week's pairing is domestic. It's the King Estate Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris. And you'll get information as well on the pairings, in addition to how to get the wines from that too. So
I do have a question from Gillian. Gillian, any reason in particular Sicilian wine seems to be trending this summer?
So actually, in the beginning of 2020, they were really trending. And then this global pandemic thing happened. So that shut a lot of that down. What happens when you have a unique style of wine coming into our awareness is Furpado isn't everywhere. It's not in every restaurant. It's not in every store. The only way people find out about grapes like this or regions like Sicily that are sort of having this beautiful renaissance right now is when people like myself or sort of, intrepid bartender or someone in a cheese shop has an opportunity to taste something and fall in love with it and then talk it up to the customers. And of course, for all of 2020, that wasn't happening. People were just buying based on memory, on what they liked, and whatever they could buy online. So it presented a challenge, I think, for this kind of a style. So I first tasted Furpados in the very beginning of 2020, fell in love with the style, and then showcased it in Zoom tastings, of course, but couldn't really highlight it, nor could the stores, because shops just didn't have an opportunity to really be tasting wine with people. There was no tasting anymore, remember that. So now that we're kind of, moving back into, in-person things, I think that I'm hoping that this style of wine will kind of shift over, as well as the Greek and Eastern European. And just for the record, just keep this in mind, everybody. South Africa just declared its vintage like one of the best ever. So South African wines are absolutely right. Last year's and the year before, we're seeing really, really remarkably high quality wine coming out of South Africa, and very, very value driven. And South Africa is known for a particular grape called Pinotage. It's not my thing personally, but Cabernet Sauvignon from South Africa, Chenin Blanc from South Africa, Chardonnay from South Africa, and there's a sparkling wine from Graham Beck Brut and Rosé that is one of my all-time favorite sparkling wines. That's very similar to a champagne, which if you can get it, definitely try that. Well worth it. So again, those are just, that's why Sicily's so beautiful. Just to circle back for a quick second, it's they have such a wonderful climate there. The grapes are easy to grow. They make good wine. And hopefully we'll continue to see more coming out of there. And Sardinia, I don't have time today to talk about it, but Sardinia is another one. We can talk about that next week. So I would recommend it. Please send questions in for next week. If you have something that I haven't addressed on a Wine 101 level, we'll be tackling some other more sales and marketing aspects next week for wine and cheese. But I'm always happy to incorporate some more Wine 101 and fun facts and history in there as well. Just send them along. So I think that, unless there's any other questions, Susan? All right, so I just want to say a quick thank you to our hosts at Cheval and our sponsor, King Estate, and it's been my pleasure to talk to you all today, and I look forward to seeing everybody next week. And I don't know where mine